The story he gave police sounded impossible before anyone proved it was false. It was December in Utah. A young mother was gone. Her phone, her routine, her home, her children, and her marriage all became part of a timeline that would haunt investigators for years. When her husband finally had to explain where he had been, the answer was a winter camping trip after midnight with two small boys. That is the image the case never escaped. A van leaving the ordinary world of a suburban house and heading into cold desert darkness, while Susan Powell disappeared from the record of daily life. Susan Cox Powell lived in West Valley City, Utah. She was a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend, and a woman whose life had become increasingly documented through worry, messages, financial stress, and family concern. On the night before she was reported missing in December 2009, the house still looked like a house. By the next day, it had become a scene investigators would return to again and again. The case remains officially unresolved in the way that matters most. Susan's remains have not been found. No one was convicted of murdering her. West Valley City still treats the case as a missing person investigation tied to an unresolved disappearance. That legal posture matters because a responsible episode cannot narrate suspicion as conviction. But the absence of a conviction does not mean the case is empty. The Powell case is one of the most disturbing American missing person stories because the known facts create pressure from every direction. There's the house, there's a sudden absence, there's a camping story, there's the behavior afterward, there's a later tragedy in Washington. There are documents, interviews, recordings, family warnings, and years of searches. The first layer is the house. The disappearance from a home always forces investigators to ask whether the home is truly the starting point or only the place where the story was staged. In Susan's case, people close to her did not see her simply vanish into an unknown life. They saw a woman whose relationships and safety had already raised concern. The second layer is the weather. A winter camping trip can be normal in the right context. A trip after midnight with young children and freezing conditions. On the same night, a wife and mother disappears is not normal in the way investigators needed to evaluate. The claim did not convict anyone, but it demanded scrutiny. Job Hill, Susan's husband, became the central figure in that scrutiny. He was not convicted in Susan's disappearance. He was not put on trial for her death. But police and the public focused intensely on him because of his explanation, his behavior, and the circumstances around the case. Coloring matters. Suspicion is not the same as a verdict. The camping story became powerful because it asked people to believe an ordinary family detail inside an extraordinary timeline. A father took children camping. That sentence can sound harmless. At the hour, the weather, the missing wife, the police contact, the search, the home, and the story changes. The sentence begins to sound like a gap in the world. Investigators had to ask basic questions before they could ask dramatic ones. When was Susan last seen? Who spoke with her? What did Holgorst know? What was happening at home? What items were missing? What items were left behind? What did the boys say? What did the vehicle show? What did phone records show? What did the house show? True crime often makes evidence look instant. The Powell case shows the opposite. It shows how a family home can hold clues and still not give an answer. It shows how a suspect can be surrounded by suspicion and still not be convicted. It shows how a missing person can remain legally missing, even when everyone watching the case believes something terrible happened. The early searches carried a particular cruelty. Searchers were not looking in one obvious place. They were looking across broad winter spaces, desert roads, abandoned areas, mine shafts, snow, brush, remote terrain. A missing body in that landscape can become almost impossible to find. That is why the visuals should feel wide and cold. The landscape is part of the evidence problem. The case also had a domestic interior. There were concerns about the marriage, financial issues, and family dynamics. Susan's family had worries. Friends had worries. Later public documents and reporting gave viewers more to consider. But the script has to avoid turning every difficult marriage detail into proof. A bad relationship can explain fear. It does not by itself prove what happened. That distinction is one of the hardest parts of this case. The public sees a husband with an implausible story and wants the law to match the feeling. But investigators need more than feeling. They need evidence strong enough to survive court. Susan Powell's case became a long demonstration of the distance between public certainty and prosecutable proof. The boys, Charlie and Braden, are central to the tragedy, but they should never be used as decoration. They were children inside a case created by adults. They were also witnesses in a limited and fragile way, because small children can say things that matter, but those statements have to be handled carefully. The episode can acknowledge their presence without reenacting them or turning them into props. One of the most painful facts is that the story did not stop with Susan's disappearance. Josh moved to Washington. Custody and supervision became part of the legal aftermath. In February 2012, during a supervised visit, Josh killed the two boys and himself. The details of that day are horrific, but a strong episode does not need graphic description. It needs a consequence. The unresolved disappearance of Susan was followed by the deaths of her children. That later event changed the way the public understood the earlier case. It did not create a murder conviction for Susan. It did not locate her. It did not answer every question. But it made the fear around Josh feel unbearable. The man at the center of suspicion in Susan's disappearance was now responsible for the deaths of the children. That fact hangs over every retelling. Still, the legal line remains important. Josh's later act is a fact. The suspicion around Susan's disappearance is a fact. The absence of a conviction is also a fact. Handing all three at once is the only honest way to tell the story. The official status line is cold because it is unfinished. Susan Powell remains missing. No one was convicted of her murder. The case is not a clean courtroom ending. It is a file that never received the answer a family needed. That is why the final act should not pretend to deliver closure. The investigation also exposed the difficulty of timing. If a person disappears at night, the timeline becomes fragile. Small details matter. When someone was last heard from, when a phone stopped, when a vehicle moved, when a neighbor noticed something, when children were seen, when police entered the house. Which detail can be meaningful, but only if it can be verified. Josh's explanation placed the family away from the house during the hours that mattered. A camping trip becomes more than an alibi when the person who should have been home is gone. Investigators had to test where he went, how long he was gone, what he took, what the children experienced, and whether the story matched the physical and digital record. That is where the van becomes a visual anchor. It is not just a vehicle. It is the object that connects the house to the desert. It carries the story from domestic space into remote space. It gives the audience something concrete. Frost on a windshield, camping gear inside, a road in winter darkness, tire tracks leading away. The home is the other anchor. A kitchen, a bedroom, a hallway, a laundry room, a phone charger, a set of keys. These ordinary details are powerful because they show what disappearance interrupts. Susan did not vanish from a movie set. She vanished from a life full of small household objects that should have been waiting for her the next morning. The public record also includes Susan's own efforts to document concern. She left behind material that has been discussed in reporting and later case coverage, including expressions of fear and statements meant to protect her voice if something happened. The episode should handle that material carefully. It should not dramatize it with fake handwritten confession scenes. It should show closed folders, blurred pages, and the idea of a person trying to be heard after silence. The Powell family dynamics extended beyond Josh and Susan. Josh's father, Stephen Powell, became part of the larger public story through disturbing behavior and later criminal proceedings unrelated to proving Susan's murder. His presence in the case deepened public unease, but again, careful language matters. The existence of disturbing family context does not replace proof of what happened to Susan. This is why the case has never been easy to summarize. If the episode only says, a woman vanished and her husband had a strange story, it misses the later tragedy. If it only focuses on the later tragedy, it makes Susan's disappearance feel like a prologue. If it only focuses on family dysfunction, it risks turning pain into spectacle. The correct structure is a slow tightening around absence. Start with the absence. Susan is not where she should be. Then the explanation. Josh says he took the boys camping. Then the questions. The time, the weather, the vehicle, the home, the calls, the searches. Then the pressure. Police focus on Josh, but a charge does not come. Then the aftermath, Washington custody, supervision, and the terrible 2012 ending. Then return to the absence. Susan is still missing. That structure lets the suspense come from reality, not from exaggerated narration. The viewer does not need a fake twist. The facts already create dread. A mother disappears. A husband gives an explanation that strains belief. Children survive the first stage, then do not survive the later one. The case never reaches a criminal trial for Susan's death. The file remains open in the public mind. The visuals should never imply that the case is solved when the legal record is not. Invert a final image of prison bars for Susan's disappearance, because no one was convicted for that crime. Use a missing person folder, an empty road, a winter house, a phone on a table, a searchlight crossing snow. Those images communicate uncertainty without falsely closing the case. The episode should also avoid using real images of the children for emotional impact, unless those images are in licensed source material and the user has explicitly chosen that path. In this production, the safer and stronger choice is symbolic absence. 2 empty chairs in a supervised visitation room, toys out of focus, a quiet hallway, a candle, a closed case file. The audience understands without exploitation. The West Valley City context matters because official agencies are still the frame for the case. A YouTube narrator can analyze timelines in public records, but the case does not become solved because online viewers agree on a suspect. The legal truth remains unfinished. The official case remains tied to investigators' records and whatever evidence may still exist. The searches matter for the same reason searching remote Utah terrain is not summited floor. It shows why the absence endured. If Susan's remains were hidden in a difficult place, the landscape itself became a barrier to proof. Mine openings, winter roads, desert brush, snow, and distance all made the search larger than the neighborhood canvas. There is a particular kind of helplessness in a missing person case where the public feels sure something happened but cannot point to the body, the trial, or the conviction. The Powell case lives in that helplessness. People can list troubling facts. They can point to behavior. They can cite the camping claim. They can cite the later death. But they still cannot say a jury convicted someone of murdering Susan. That gap should be treated as the center of the episode, not as an inconvenience. It is what makes the case so haunting. A solved case can end with a verdict. An unsolved case ends by returning the viewer to the last known facts and asking them to sit with what is missing. The later Washington tragedy should be placed carefully in the timeline. It should not arrive as shock bait. It should arrive as the outcome of failed safety concerns, custody pressure, and a man under scrutiny who still had access to the children under supervision. The point is not to describe violence. The point is to show how the case produced a second devastating loss before Susan was ever found. The episode can say that the boys were killed by Josh in 2012 because that is the established record of what happened. It does not need to describe the method in detail. A respectful narration gives the audience enough to understand the legal and emotional stakes without forcing them through graphic imagery. After that, the story becomes quieter again. Susan is still missing. Her sons are gone. Josh is dead. A prosecution for Susan's death never happened. The people who love Susan are left with a record full of suspicion and a file without a recovered person. That quiet is heavier than a dramatic ending. The strongest final sequence should be built from contrasts. A warm porch light against snow, a cold, thin windshield, a desert road under a dark sky, a courthouse archive, a blank case folder, a candle in a window. Each image should say the same thing in a different way. There was a life here, and the official answer never arrived. The phrase, midnight camping trip, remains powerful because it is not only a claim, it is a test of credibility. It asks whether ordinary words can cover extraordinary circumstances. In this case, the words never convinced the public. But public disbelief did not produce a murder conviction. That is the tragedy of the legal record. The case also warns against overconfidence. A viewer can be morally certain about a person and still lack the legal mechanism to prove a charge, and investigators can suspect and still not charge. Families can know what they believe and still wait for evidence. The Powell case is a kind of story where certainty and proof do not meet cleanly. For pacing, the episode should move in waves. The first wave is disappearance. The second is a camping explanation. The third is search and investigation. The fourth is custody in Washington. The fifth is the unresolved ending. Each wave should have its own visual palette but remain cold, restrained, and documentary. No black text cards are needed. The images carry the mood. The first wave needs time because the ordinary world matters. A missing person case becomes frightening when the viewer understands what ordinary looked like before the break. A porch light, a kitchen sink, a phone charger, a laundry basket, a van in the driveway. These are not decorative details, they are the pieces of life that make absence visible. Susan's disappearance did not begin as a courtroom statement, it began as worry. Allen is not where they should be. Calls are not answered. A work routine breaks. Family members sense that the explanation does not fit the person they know. That kind of worry is quiet at first, and then it hardens into fear. The second wave, the camping claim, should be told slowly enough for the audience to feel why investigators focused on it. A person can say they went camping, but the context changes everything. The hour was wrong. The weather was wrong. The children were young. Susan was gone. The trip did not sit naturally inside the night. That is why the explanation became one of the strongest emotional anchors in the case. The visual language for this section should stay concrete. Do not show a fake family around a campfire. Show a cold road. Show frost on a windshield. Show camping gear in a van. Show an empty campsite under a dead sky. The audience does not need reenacted children to understand the claim. In fact, avoiding children makes the sequence more respectful and more unsettling. The third wave is investigation, and this is where the case becomes a file instead of only a mystery. Investigators have to reduce fear into usable questions. What can be proved? What can be searched? What can be tested? What can be compared? What can be ruled out? A missing person's life becomes paperwork, maps, phone records, interviews, and property searches. That transformation is harsh, but it is how the system works. Searches across Utah terrain also need explanation. A viewer who has never seen that landscape may imagine a simple sweep. The reality is harder. Wide desert spaces, winter conditions, old mines, rough roads, distance, weather, and time. If a person is hidden in that environment, a search can last years and still fail. The case's unresolved status is partly a legal fact and partly a geographic nightmare. The fourth wave. The Washington aftermath should be introduced as consequence rather than spectacle. After Susan disappeared, the case did not remain frozen in Utah. Custody, family concern, supervision, and legal decisions followed the surviving children. That path ended in 2012 with the deaths of Charlie and Braden. The episode should let the fact land, then move back into the unresolved question of Susan rather than lingering on graphic detail. There is a reason that later tragedy changed public memory. Before it, some people could still imagine uncertainty around Josh in a more abstract way. After it, his capacity for lethal violence was no longer abstract. But the legal record still did not produce a conviction for Susan's disappearance because Josh was dead and Susan had not been found. That combination is what makes the case feel so closed emotionally and so open legally. The role of Susan's family deserves space. Families in missing person cases often become public advocates, searchers, archivists, and guardians of memory. They speak when the missing person cannot. They correct careless narratives. They push for records. They keep the case visible after the news cycle moves on. In Susan's case, family advocacy became part of why the public never let the file disappear. But advocacy is not the same as evidence. That is another boundary the episode should respect. Family members can know a loved one, recognize danger, and hold strong beliefs. And motivators still need a prosecutable case. The pain of the Powell case is that those two realities never fully merged into a completed criminal trial for Susan. The case also raises uncomfortable questions about systems. What did police know and when? What did custody officials know? What did family members report? What warning signs were treated as urgent and which were not? A responsible episode can ask those questions without pretending to answer everyone. The goal is not to assign every institutional failure in one narration. The goal is to show how unresolved cases often leave more than one kind of grief. Digital material matters because Susan tried to preserve a voice, and cases involving coercive control or fear inside a relationship. Messages, journals, recordings, and documents can become a person's way of saying, if I vanish, look here. That idea is chilling and it should be handled with restraint. The visual should be blurred pages, a closed laptop or recorder, a blank folder. The narration can explain the meaning without displaying private words. The absence of Susan's remains also changes the moral texture of the case. A body can give investigators forensic information, create a place of mourning, and allow a family to move from searching to grieving, without that a family is suspended between hope, knowledge, and legal uncertainty. The episode should make that suspension clear. Missing is not a softer word than dead for the people left behind. It is often a harder one. The official status also affects the title and thumbnail choices. The episode should not use language that says the case was solved. It should not promise a final answer. It can use "She never came home" because that is true. It can use "the midnight camping trip" because that describes the central claim. It should not use a definitive murder-solved phrase unless the legal record supports it. The narration should also avoid saying the children witnessed specific things unless the record being cited supports it. They were part of the night in the later investigation, but they were children. Their words and experiences should not be turned into invented dialogue. If the episode references what children reportedly said, it should be phrased as reports and handled gently. Another layer is a financial and domestic context. Public records and reporting have described stress control and instability around the marriage. These factors matter because they help explain why people close to Susan were worried. But again, the episode cannot make the mistake of treating stress as proof. Many marriages contain conflict. The legal question is what evidence connects conflict to disappearance. The story becomes stronger when it admits uncertainty. Weak videos pretend to know every hidden moment. Strong videos show the record in the gap. In Susan Powell's case, the gap is enormous. What happened inside or around the home where Susan was taken or left, whether evidence was destroyed, where her remains are, and why proof never became a murder conviction. That gap should be visible in the rhythm. Hold a shot of a snowy road while the narration says investigators search broad terrain. Hold a shot of an empty kitchen while the narration says the home became a source of questions. Hold a shot of a closed file while the narration says the case remains officially unresolved. The viewer should feel absence in the visuals, not only hear it in the words. The episode also has to be careful with Josh's death. Because he died in 2012, there was no future trial where a jury could test the state's case about Susan. Death ended the possibility of one kind of accountability while creating another irreversible loss. That is the central reason the case feels unfinished. The person most scrutinized by the public was gone before the disappearance could be tried. In many cases, a courtroom gives the story a final structure: two statements, witnesses, verdict, sentence. Susan Powell's case has no such final chapter for her disappearance. It is investigations, public documents, family advocacy, and the later Washington death. That means the episode must build its own structure around chronology and evidence rather than courtroom closure. The safest, strongest ending is not, we know exactly what happened. It is a record points toward fear, suspicion, and loss, but the legal system never produced a murder conviction and Susan was never found. That sentence may feel less dramatic than the solved case reveal, but it is more powerful because it is honest. When the narration discusses the house, show the house and the rooms. When it discusses the camping explanation, show the van gear, snow, and desert roads. When it discusses official records, show files, archives, and interview rooms. When it discusses the boys, show absence rather than faces. When it discusses the unresolved ending, show the road in the folder. The case is not famous because it has one perfect piece of evidence. It is famous because the whole pattern feels unbearable. The timing, the story, the later deaths, the missing body, the absence of a trial for Susan, the family's long grief. The absence is not empty. It is full of questions. That is why a strong episode should resist the urge to overstate. Do not say the case was legally solved. Do not say Susan was found. Do not say Josh was convicted for her death. Say what can be said. Susan Powell disappeared from West Valley City in December 2009. Josh Powell became the central figure in suspicion. He claimed a winter camping trip with the boys. He later killed the boys and himself in 2012. Susan remains missing and no one was convicted of her murder. Those facts are enough. They do not need to be inflated. They are already one of the darkest combinations in modern missing person storytelling. The final image should not be a headline. It should be a cold road in the Utah dark, a van's tire tracks fading under new snow, and a file still open on a desk. The story he gave police sounded impossible. The worst part is that even after everything that followed, the case still never gave Susan Powell the ending her family needed.